hearing of the Committee on Finance is hereby resumed. This morning, we will hear the proposed budget of the Presidential Communications Development and Strategic Planning Office. We would like to welcome the PCDSPO family headed by Yusek Manuel Quezon III. Sir, good morning. If you have a presentation, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. For the information of the committee, I would like to give a brief overview of our office. In terms of the budget, of course, as you can see, the increase we have asked for this year is a very modest 3.7%, bringing our budget from 69.65 million pesos to 72.2 million pesos. Now, in terms of what this office does, and as you can see, it's a very young office. We primarily handle the speeches, statements, and messages of the president. This includes the research and preparation, as well as the visuals and other collaterals that are required. Most often, you will see this in the State of the Nation address, where from the speech to the videos and the PowerPoint presentation is prepared by our office. The flagship activity of this office, of course, is the official Gazette online, which is gov.ph. It was designated as the national government portal by the President in 2011. And part of our engagements there is including the development of a citizen engagement initiative or feedback mechanism, for which we currently handle on the average of about 130 inquiries from the public a week, and we are developing in consonance with other agencies, the ability to track these requests in order that they could be answered within the period mandated by law. We also handle the institutional memory of the Philippine presidency, and this is quite a large project that we've been undergoing with the main objective of placing all executive issuances basically since time began on the official Gazette. And on this end, we are very proud to inform the committee that we have completed 10 administrations with a total of 24,561 executive issuances, and that we are ongoing with 2 administrations, Macapagal and President Marcos, respectively, with a remaining 188 and 1,302 documents to do. Now, in the remaining period for this and next year, we will also be completing the other documentary institutional memory requirements, such as the complete list of appointments and designations for all administrations, as well as historical papers and documents, which you will be familiar as a lawyer with our sections of the old print official Gazette. And what we're trying to do is place these all online so that they're freely accessible and searchable to the public. We also handle the Presidential Museum and Library and its collateral websites and other things online. And again, this is with a view that in the President's view, it is important that in all research and in the preparation of all statements and other documents for him, that we have the full access to the entire institutional memory of the executive branch. And by doing so as well, make it available to the public. We publish a good news newsletter online every week, and we do other reference publications such as a comprehensive calendar of the Republic, an electoral gazette, which we have already made available freely online, as well as the publication of these executive issuances under the Message of the President series, which would be, we believe, a very useful research material for legislators, for the lawyers, and the public. We also, by mandate of the Executive Order 4, which created us, we handle the style manual for the entire executive department, and in this regard, we have also dealt with constitutional commissions and other agencies, with the view that hopefully within this year or by next year, there will be a manual that will be available to all government workers to assist them in the writing and crafting of their official documents, including correspondence and reports. We also produce, as anyone can see online and in various presentations used by the government, program collaterals, infographics, videos, as well as handling two websites in consonance with other agencies. One of them is the Open Data site, which is data.gov.ph, which provides data sets to the public, which is again useful for research and for the purpose of transparency in government data, as well as the Foreign Aid Transparency Hub, or FAITH, which has pioneered making available information on foreign donations for disasters. Mr. Chairman, in terms of these activities, we believe that, with your indulgence, that the support of the Congress will make possible the completion of many of the tasks we have set out and the availability of a large body of work to the public, helping with our shared objectives of transparency and accountability for the public. May I also inform you, Mr. Chairman, because of your interest in the Freedom of Information Act, that yesterday the technical working group of the House of Representatives, in terms of its Committee on Public Information, has submitted to its mother committee the Freedom of Information bill, which is in every possible respect similar to the one that has already been passed by the Senate. With that, Mr. Chairman, if there are any questions you would have for us, we'd be very happy to answer them.
Thank you, Yusek Quezon. Just a few questions, actually. Una, sa SONA kayo nag-handle ng videos?
Yes, sir.
So, nung tinawag ni Pinoy Secretary, or rather, Lilia de Lima, at finocus niyo si Laila de Lima, kayo yun o ibang may kagagawa nun?
Iba po. In terms of, if you remember, merong pong bahagi doon where there were videos that were played on
Pareho
screen.
sila nagrereklamo doon, ah.
Opo.
Nagrereklamo si Lilia, nagrereklamo si Laila.
We will inform RTVM, sir.
Few questions, sir. One, executive issuances, you guarantee that that's going to be the universe? I remember studying, when I was still studying, that was a big problem of ours. Ilan nga ba ang feeding inisyo ni Marcos? Ilan nga bang LOI? And there were some missing copies even from the UP College of Law Library. Yeah,
Yes,
even
sir.
from the UP Law Center.
That's a very interesting question. And in fact, that's one of the things that delayed us, which was actually finding the universe of these. Now, what we have done, Mr. Chairman, is first of all to ensure that all that have been published will be online. Now, there are those, and in
Mga
fact,
secret.
I've had a meeting with former Deputy Executive Secretary Ronnie Zamora, who's a member of Congress, particularly because of the Marcos issuances, and he gave some information. And we arrived at it's an interesting situation, for example, that if you would have a particular executive order, and the Malacanang Records Office will say that the original copy was withdrawn, Mr. Zamora was able to give some background on it, but then the actual disposition is to put a notice on that number saying exactly what the records bear out. This serves as to do two things. First of all, it shares with the public the real state of the issuance. The second is, by putting it on the record, it may inspire other people who encounter it to come forward should they have actual copies of the issuances. This is a problem that is not unique to the executive branch. For example, I was informed, because we have to deal both with the libraries of the Senate and the House, and even with the Supreme Court, with whom we work very well, that even the Supreme Court, for example, does not have a complete set of all its decisions. They have had to send researchers, for example, to the United States, particularly for the period when we had American justices in the High Court. But rest assured, Mr. Chairman, in terms of your specific question, that what we are trying to do is present as complete a record to the public with three things in mind. The first is you have the text so that it's easily copy-pastable for research and that sort of thing. Second, a scan as much as possible of the original signed issuance. And third, a scan of the actual published issuance, because we are aware that there may be discrepancies between the three, and that in such a case, it would be incumbent upon us to provide those accessing the material with as complete a record as possible.
So you're talking PDs during the time of Marcos, LOIs, to include EOs, AOs, because I remember you mentioning executive issuances. It covers everything.
Yes, sir. And in fact, going beyond those, because and in fact, the complete sort of list of them from general orders to proclamations to administrative orders and all of them. Yes, that is our objective.
Is it part of your function to establish protocols on how these will be issued, how they will be, as a matter of course, published, and if they will be withdrawn, what process they should follow in case they are withdrawn? I raised this issue in question on protocols, actually, to formalize everything and to make your successor have an easier time tracking these documents. One pointed example: Congress always sends laws to the president, bills rather, to the president for his signature. Quite frankly, we don't even know when they are received by the office of the president. Technically speaking, it should be stamped received by the PLLO, and once received by the PLLO, as if received by the president. But the executive branch has since interpreted it to mean actual receipt by the OP. But how would we know when that actually happens? This is for purposes of computing the 30-day period before a bill will lapse into law if the president does not sign it. Certain similar situations, if only to preserve the integrity of our process, for protocols to be established with respect to executive issuances. Are you on that, in part of that team, or is that your team that's doing that too?
Sir, the division of labor would be that the office that handles the release of documents would be the Malacanang Records Office. And in fact, it is they who attest to the authenticity of the copies we are provided. Internal management of the documents would, of course, be under the purview of the Executive Secretary, and we defer to him. With regards to your specific questions, precisely we require that the copies provided to us have been authenticated by the Malacanang Records Office, and that therefore our interest, and then this is also enshrined in the bill that was approved by the Senate in terms of FOI, which allows for electronic publication, that there should be a timestamp that would be your basis for when it was published.
Would this include the ancillary and attached documents or reports that were submitted or taken into account in the issuance of in the making of an executive issuance? Parang legislative intent pa. Insofar as an executive issuance is concerned, parang the executive's intent at the time that they wrote it to help in interpreting any provision in case of doubt of an EO.
My understanding, Mr. Chairman, is that these may be provided upon authorization of the President. If I recall the provisions of the FOI, that documents that have been used for the formulation of policy once announced could be made available to the public. But we are looking at a large volume of documents, and so we believe that for the particular purposes of it that we have set out to do for the official gazette, that we...
Wala pa yan.
Wala pa yun, sir.
To follow, if ever.
Yeah, because we're focused, for example, there is no complete roster, for example, of all the reports of the ad hoc commissions that have been formed by the presidents over time. And tracking them down is quite an interesting activity. The same applies also for departmental issuances. In fact, in our initial research, we understand that the records of most departments would only go back to the 1970s. But if you recall, for example, in the impeachment that was heard by the Senate, one of the issuances that was required was, I believe, an order that was signed by Governor General Leonard Wood in 1922. And therefore, it is, I think, of great public interest to make sure that we dig around as much as possible to put these departmental issuances. This would allow all policymakers in all branches, in the legislature and the executive, as well as those reviewing the laws in the courts, to as much as possible have a handy way of finding these.
Still adding to this, forgive me for delving in this. When my term ends in the Senate, I will put everything in a box and bring it home. The same is true with you, the same is true with the president, the same is true with any official in any government agency or office. But insofar as archiving or making a diary of the president's activities are concerned, with or without the FOI, these letters are theoretically owned by the office itself. Is there a way, at the very least, for these papers to be kept in the archives of Malacanang, or at the very least, copies retained by Malacanang? Hindi yung iuwi nila ng, I mean, when Ramos's term ended, at that time, I went to his house 2 weeks after. They had 2 or 3 containers full of boxes. What's the rule now, and what protocols are you following?
My understanding, sir, is that in terms of the handling and classification of documents, that the National Archives law would apply, and it does have a section on presidential documents. I do note, for example, that the repository of actual signed issuances is the Malacanang Records Office. Those are not brought home by a president. However, presidents, by tradition, and it is a long-standing one, do bring home their public and private papers. I do believe that that is with the understanding among all our former presidents that this is done both in terms of security, because they are the best judge of the confidentiality of some of these items, and second of all, they do have a vested interest in the protection of their documents. Some presidents have donated their public and private papers. My grandfather is one of them. The Rojas papers are in a foundation. I believe that the Marcoses also made a similar arrangement for with the National Library. We do support, and we are trying to convince other agencies that the time has come on the American model for a more systematic policy to be enshrined that would apply to all. And we are hopeful that before 2016 this may be done. In fact, I spoke to the Senate President and to the Speaker that
Do you need the law? Do you need the legislative
it may
cover?
be faster to do it by executive order, because
Yeah.
that's what they did in the United States. We would be very happy to present the possibility of a law to you should you want to sponsor one. Because I did mention, for example, to the Senate President and to the Speaker of the House that the protection and archiving of the various Senate presidents and speakers, minority and majority leaders, should receive some sort of official support and protection. I noticed, for example, that when Senator Tolentino passed away, his library and many of his papers were dispersed, as far as I know, and that was very sad. We cannot assume that your children or your grandchildren would be as interested in the papers as you might be, and it would be a benefit to the country if some sort of support were given to this. Nonetheless, for now, what we do have is the National Archives law and a general sort of tradition among our leaders.
One last point on the Presidential Museum. This is for all presidents, not only for Pinoy.
Yes, sir. We have made a concerted effort to make sure that it is fair and balanced to all our presidents. It includes, if, for example, I'll give
Actually,
you.
that's not the reason why I asked. But actually, I asked in relation to the American model. By analogy, if we're following it, each president should have one. Number
That-
one.
they-
Number two.
Yes.
If I remember my constitutional law correctly, any and all gifts received by the president while in office is actually owned by the state and not owned by him personally, meaning binigyan siya ng espada, ng barel, ng kung ano man, that's actually owned by the state and not by him. But I'm not aware of any president who actually has a museum publicly funded na doon niya nilagay lahat ng mga yon, because it's technically owned by the state. They of course all bring it home with them. Binigyan sila ng kung ano man ng papa. Technically, that's owned by the state beyond a certain value, and I'm sure all of these gifts go beyond that value. With Pinoy, how will that be handled?
I'm not connected with the Aquino Museum, but I do know that there is already the example of the memorabilia of former President Aquino, which is precisely on display and categorized that way in Tarlac, yes. I believe it is privately funded. The only one I can think of is my grandfather's state gifts, which are in the Quezon Memorial Shrine.
I've seen it.
Yeah, but you're correct that is, but that was because of his will. I mean, he specifically donated all public and private documents and his memorabilia to the government. So, it without a actual law or an executive order mandating this, you are correct that it is at the discretion of the former chief executive, and it does not enjoy the curatorial assistance, much less the funding support of the state, which it should, both for in terms of preservation and accountability.
I only brought that up because while you're at it, you might want to do this as well.
Yes, of course, sir. Thank you for that
Actually,
suggestion.
aside from President Quezon, are you aware of any other president that has an extensive collection or museum of his belongings and his papers? Minsan pala ako nag-date dyan sa Quezon Memorial na yan eh.
There are the
And he is actually still buried there, right?
Yes, sir. He is there. The Laurel Foundation is again privately funding. Although what has been the practice is that the government would provide land. So my understanding is the land on which the Laurel Foundation exists here in Ross Boulevard was provided by the government. I do believe a similar arrangement was made for the Magsaysay Foundation. But the building itself was put up with the funding of the Rockefellers. The Marcoses have done their best in Sarat for the memorabilia of former President Marcos. The Roses have begun this. I believe
Where his body is, right? It's there in Sarat, right?
Yes, sir. In their ancestral house, if you go there, a lot of the memorabilia of former President Marcos
Yeah, and
is
his
there.
body is still there, right?
Yes.
In that
The-
glass encasing?
Yes, sir. The problem of the Marcos papers is a bit more problematic because many of them are still under the jurisdiction of the PCGG. But I do know that the family itself, should things be resolved, have already have set up a Marcos Presidential Library in the National Library. For our other presidents, I believe that the Quirino papers are in the Ayala Museum. The Magsaysay papers have never been cataloged, but they are preserved in the Magsaysay Foundation. I believe former President Macapagal Arroyo was making arrangements for her father's papers and her own papers, but I would assume that at this present that is on hold. Although I do believe she was talking to UST because of her father being an alumni there.
Erap.
I was actually talking to a former member of the staff of former President Estrada because I was very concerned with tying up the loose ends because the last few months of his stay in office meant that there was a bit of uncertainty about the actual issuances. For example, we discovered that there is a practice in the Malacanang Records Office where you reserve numbers, let's say for proclamations, that sort of thing, but not necessarily use them. And so we had to make an inquiry and then put this in our records so that in the future there won't be confusion among researchers.
Try former Congressman Boyeng Remulla.
I'll take that under advisement, sir. And
He
get
might
in
know
touch with
because
him.
if I recall
Yes, sir.
correctly, all the documents signed by Arab had to pass through him first,
Thank you, sir. I'll
or he had to
make
clear it before he signed it.
make a point of that. Because the other thing we were doing also is there, as you pointed out, there has to be an official chronology of the administration. Now, this was easier up to the administration of President Marcos because the official gazette would publish an official chronology every week. Starting with President Aquino, this was no longer the case, and so we've had to piece together through official releases what every president did every day. It's easier for me to tell you who was appointed and what the president did in 1952 than in 1992. And as we all get older, this will become more important as living memory passes.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for answering our queries. There being no further inquiries or interventions from any other member, Chair hereby approves the proposed budget of the PCD SPO and submits it to plenary for deliberation and final approval. Thank you, sir, again for indulging us and for your time this morning.
Thank you,
Magandang
Mr.
umaga po.
Chairman.